Hello everybody. Today, this video will help you better understand what goes into writing an IB Psychology on-demand essay. This first attempt though is going to begin with an open notes essay so we can learn all the skills before we eventually move towards the on-demand portion of it. But still, all of this information will be helpful for you as you prepare for this first essay in the next couple of weeks, and also for those IB testers, these skills will be used on the IB test. But for everyone, these will be key skills. We've been practicing them, developing them, but our job today is to begin to put them all together. Our lesson objective is that I want you to understand the demands and the structures of an IB essay. And essays in general are challenging because it'll ask you to show your understanding of content and evidence, your critical thinking skills, and your ability to organize and communicate a clear argument. These are a little bit different than short answer questions because you're not just explaining a concept, you actually have to put together an argument and use evidence to support that argument. You also have to be very critical and evaluate the strengths and limitations of your evidence. The critical thinking piece is hugely important, and it's going to be a skill that we continue to work on throughout the year. First of all, there are several different command terms that you might be asked to write on. The first one is evaluate, which means to weigh the strengths and limitations of an argument with reference to relevant research. To what extent is to make a decision based on evidence that shows the amount of responsibility different topics have for shaping behavior. Discuss means to provide a detailed explanation of how different factors impact a behavior or topic. In contrast, explain the differences that exist between two different theories or pieces of evidence. These are the only four command terms that IB will use when they ask you to write about an essay. So you should be aware of these four. Today, you will be choosing between an evaluate and a to what extent prompt. This is the rubric that I'll be using in order to assess you. This is the IB rubric. I've modified it just a little bit in structure, but the words themselves are the same. So essentially, what IB is going to be looking for is that, first of all, you focus on the question, and you're able to explain the problem and issues raised in the question. You also are going to be asked to clearly answer the question and organize your thoughts. So we're going to be looking for you to the answer demonstrates organization and clarity throughout the response. Here's the more important elements, things that we're going to be working on. One thing that IB wants you to be able to show is your general knowledge and understanding about psychology. So students must demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of specific key terms and concepts related to the question or problem. In order to meet at the standard, your response needs to demonstrate relevant, detailed knowledge and understanding, psychological terminologies used appropriately. The big idea here is that you need to show that you understand psychology. Whether you're talking about brain plasticity or localization of function or different elements about biological factors, you need to be able to use all of the knowledge that we've talked about so far this year and talk about those terms when relevant. You're also going to be asked to use research to support your answer. So students must use their knowledge of carefully selected research to support their argument. You're also going to be asked to explain why you're using that evidence. So in order to meet at this standard, relevant psychological research is used in support of research and thoroughly explained. Research selected is effectively used and develop an argument. So you're not just picking two studies that relate to your topic, you need to be picking studies that really help you build an argument and explain your stance on this issue. And then the last aspect is, again, probably one of the hardest parts of this entire process, that is critical thinking. Students must use multiple types of critical thinking patterns to build an argument. The response consistently demonstrates well-developed critical thinking. Evaluation or discussion of relevant ideas is consistently well-developed. You should be looking at your mission critical page on pages 25 and 26 in your blue packet in order to help you make sure that you're using multiple types of critical thinking for each of the studies that you're actually going to be using. And we'll be exploring this rubric more, and you'll be getting more familiar with it as you are assessed using it. The essay structure generally follows the same patterns. It begins with an introduction. You have an explanation of your key concept as an opportunity to show your deep understanding of psychology and the terminology that applies to it. You'll then go in and explain your key evidence and your critical thinking regarding that key evidence. You must include evidence from at least 2 research studies in an essay. So with the SAQ, you only have one. This one you have to have two. So you must be prepared to use two research studies. You also will have the ability to add in a section with additional considerations or applications to the real world. Then you'll have a brief conclusion that summarizes your main points and really pushes home the main message to your readers. We're going to break these down one by one. There's also a sample essay that you'll be looking at as well in order to help you with this process. So in the introduction, your goal is to begin with a statement that clearly explains the problem or issue raised in the prompt. So, for example, if you're asked to evaluate one evolutionary theory explaining human behavior, you would want to directly state that you are attempting to discuss the strengths and limitations of different evolutionary theories. IB wants you to show them that you know what the prompt is asking you to do. You also will introduce key terms and studies that you'll be using later on in this study, or later on in the essay. You won't describe all of them at this point, but you will mention them so that we know, as a reader, that you know what you're talking about and we know where you are heading. You will also develop a thesis statement that includes your central claim and a reference to your supporting evidence. This thesis has to have an actual argument. If you're asked to write about to what extent genetics impacts human behavior, you must tell your reader to what extent it actually does. Is it very important? Is it not important? If you are asked to evaluate, you must be mentioning what are some of the strengths about the theory, what are some of the limitations about the theory. You must have an argument here in your introduction. One thing to avoid, though, is providing a hook or fluff to start your response. IB wants you to get down to business. They don't want you to tell them a pretty story. They want you to be able to show them that you know what you're talking about and you can form an argument using the evidence about the topic that you're being asked to write about. The next aspect is going to be a paragraph where you are explaining the key concept. One of the big elements that you're trying to do here is provide basic definitions of the key concepts and terms that relate to your topic. You also want to explain the topic in detail, basically stating how it actually works to shape behavior, giving us background information about the topic that you're writing on, whether it's going to be on genetics or social cognitive theory, are really important. If you're writing on genetics, you should introduce some of the key concepts and how genes actually impact human behavior. So talking about that main concept of genes lead to the creation of proteins, which lead to the creation of chemicals, which lead to behaviors. Establish that relationship right there, right off the bat. You also, if you're writing about social cognitive theory, you better talk about those motivational factors that shape social cognitive theory and provide a detailed understanding show that you have a detailed understanding about how the concept and the theory works. You also generally want to explain how and why this topic relates to the prompt. Some of the things to avoid is, first of all, skipping this section. Don't just think that one definition of a topic is enough to show your deep understanding. And also, you don't need to talk about the specific research. You shouldn't be giving your research, all of your evidence in this section. Talk generally about the concept first, and then you will go into the research next. After explaining your key concept, you're now going to be using evidence to actually support your argument that you're trying to be making. Your evidence needs to come from research studies, not from examples from class, not from examples about movies or applications to society. It must come from research studies that we have examined in class together. You're going to know it's a research study if it has a last name and a date attached to it. You should use that name and the date of that key study to identify which study you are using. You also should be using a clear study summary with the aim, method, findings, and conclusion clearly laid out. Use that structure in order to make sure that you have all of the main details of your study that's needed. You can find that information on the presentations, in your blue book, online with further research. You have many places that you can find that. You then need to explain how and why your evidence supports your central claim, essentially explaining why you selected to use this study as evidence. How does this study help you make an argument? There should be 1 to 2 sentences where you fully explain the importance of this study. Do not just restate the conclusion here. Your focus needs to be about why this evidence is valuable to you. You also need to provide critical reflection of your evidence using critical thinking skills. And you should see your mission critical page on page 25 and 26 of your blue packet in order to help with this. For each study, you need to provide 2 types of critical thinking. So if you're talking about validity, you should not only just talk about population validity, but you also should be talking about historical validity, for example. If you may bring up the limitations of a study, you may want to bring up another study as a form of triangulation in order to support that study. Talk about what the strengths, what the limitations of that evidence actually is. But you must have 2 types of critical thinking for each study. And explain your thinking for this critical thinking as well. Why, for example, if this study only uses children, does that actually matter? How does our understanding about the brain and its development impact our ability to apply this to adults? Don't just restate the conclusion as your explanation. You'll first pick your one key study as a key starting spot. But you will also have an additional consideration, basically your second study. You will provide an introduction of the perspectives that your chosen study shows about your topic. So you have to have 2 studies. So what does this second study actually help you see more about the topic? We've been practicing this in class. You also need to provide a study summary, using the aim, methods, findings, conclusion of the second study. And again, explain how and why the study is important to your central claim and provide more critical thinking of your evidence using those critical thinking skills. Use a study that shows, don't just use the same study that shows the exact same ideas as your first study. You're trying to tell the full picture of your topic. Bring in multiple studies that tell about different perspectives and add to what you are trying to argue and be able to explain why it adds to those pieces. But again, remember, you must have critical thinking for that element as well. You then can really do 2 things. One is if you would like to talk about the application of this to the real world, you can do that. And seeing how it actually impacts the real world can be a really effective way of building more of a concept. But you also can go straight into your conclusion if you feel as though you've already established your main points. In your conclusion, do summarize the key points of your essay, but don't provide a word-for-word copy of your thesis. IB just wants you to wrap up what you were thinking and be able to explain this concept in full. For our open notes essay, you are going to be choosing from one of 2 prompts. You only have to write on one of these. So this has to be good, and really this should be your focus over the next few class periods. You have these 2 choices, and these should not be much of a surprise because we've talked about them in class. 1. With reference to relevant research, to what extent is human behavior impacted by genetics? If you choose to write on that one, I highly encourage you to use your to what extent thermometer that you completed that basically provides you with a clear outline of the essay. The second essay prompt would be to evaluate social cognitive theory with reference to relevant research. This means you're going to be asked to talk about what the strengths and limitations of social cognitive theory are. For both of these prompts, you should be using the idea of antisocial behavior. So really you should be thinking about to what extent is antisocial behavior impacted by genetics, or evaluate social cognitive theory's ability to explain antisocial behavior with reference to relevant research. The key concept is you have a clear behavior, and your job is to either provide to what extent genetics impacts that, or to evaluate social cognitive theory. Pick one of these prompts, decide to focus on that. It's your choice, so choose wisely. I have a sample essay that is included on page 33 and 34 of your blue packet. As you read through this essay, and everyone should read through the essay, don't skip this point and say there's no examples. It's something that oftentimes will happen. You have the opportunity to read a sample essay, so do it. On page 33 and 34 of your packet, open it up, and as you read, you should be making some I notice and I wonder statements. You can find the essay here, some of the aspects that I have on here for you. Not only do I have the text of what you should actually be reading about, or the actual text of the essay here in this left-hand column, I have comments that explain what I actually am doing here and what my thinking pattern is in the right-hand column. You should read both of these columns to better understand what I'm trying to accomplish. The prompt itself is right up here, evaluate one evolutionary theory explaining human behavior. This essay itself is a little over 1,200 words. Your essay must be between 800 and about 1,400 words. IB doesn't want you to go longer than that. So your task is to use these resources in addition to the essay outline that I provided for you. That looks just like this, where you will select which one you are looking on and then be able to start writing through with this structure as a guide in order to actually make your argument. Use this color-coded essay guide as a starting spot. If you want to type it out in a separate place, you can, but you are going to be getting your feedback based on your ability to complete this document. So really strive to get as much of this work done as possible. When I am in class, I will be providing you with much details feedback and details as possible throughout the process. Your goal, though, is to start. So after you review this video, read the sample essay, pick your prompt, go back into your notes and all the resources that are available to you, and begin that writing process. Good luck. Write well.